choosing what races you want to race, knowing that you've chosen the right amount of races, and just making sure that you know that you're all ready to go into the season. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end. And if you have if you can answer the questions, just use the little hand, as I said earlier, and we'll talk through a couple of bits on that. So I'm going to share my screen because this week I've got a PowerPoint, just so that you don't have to look at my face all evening. So bear with me a second. So you should all be able to see my screen now. So why do we need to plan our seasons? Well, this is the main question, and this is where we're going to start. So planning our seasons, it is really important for multiple reasons. The main one here, so you don't race too much and burn out. If you're racing every weekend, then it's going to be really, really hard for you to have time to recover, and also for you to have time to actually get your training in. So you'll just end up racing and racing and racing, and actually you won't be getting any fitter. So that's the main reason. Another reason is so you can, again, as I said, fit training blocks in so that you're not losing fitness, so you can still gain fitness and stay fit for the whole season. You don't want to get halfway through the year and be like so tired that you just can't carry on and you need a 3-week break just before your target races. To give direction to training and depending on the demands of the target event. So this is really important because we need to make sure we've got target events. And to give direction to the training sort of means if you're racing a hilly race, you know that you're racing that hilly race and that's your target, so you choose hilly races to support that. If you know you're racing road races, your target event, you're not going to start racing time trials or mountain bike races halfway through the season. So that's why we need to plan out our season. And then we're moving on to where do we start? So as we mentioned, and we talked about the other week, goals. Goals are really important because they provide the key points in your season that you need to work towards. And that will help you to choose what races you do based on where your goals lie in the year. Again, demands, what sort of events? Is it hilly? How long is the race? If you're training for a crit, you don't want to be doing loads of long hours on the bike because it's not going to be the most beneficial training for that event. If you're doing a long road race, you don't want to be doing a load of short, sharp sessions. You want to do a bit of both, but you want to focus your training based on those demands and your racing based on those demands. Rider type. Again, if you're a sprinter, you don't want to be racing races. Well, not necessarily racing races, but you don't want to be aiming for a race that's really, really hilly because you're just not going to be able to benefit from your personal strengths. So it doesn't really make much sense, if that makes sense. Perfect. Next, we're moving on to the event classifications. So what this means is choosing the priority of your race. What's more important and how do you prioritize each event? So the first type of event is your most important event. And these events are A races. So these will be the races that you aim for in the year. They'll be your targets and they'll be the most important races you'll have all year. You usually have a maximum of 2, potentially 3, but you want to keep it as low as possible. So you actually have time to train and be able to be at the best for those races. There's no point having so many target races that you can't actually train and taper properly for them. So it's dependent on what you're racing and how you race. These races might be spread out slightly differently in your calendar, but usually it's quite good to have either them really close together, so you're literally carrying the fitness from one race into the next, or spread out quite evenly so you can have a full block of training into the first race and then recover and then go again for the second half of the season. If you race to fitness, you might also want to include more races before your A race. And also, you have to think about these A races about what suits your physical capabilities. As we said earlier, that's talking about the style of the race and the nature of the race. If you're a time trialist, you want to enter a time trial as your A race. You don't want to be trying to do something else, because it's just not going to be as beneficial for you, and it's going to make it harder for you to achieve those goals. In these A races, you'll have a taper week before, and a taper week we'll probably go into this in a couple of weeks' time when we're talking about training, but taper week is basically where you back off the training and make sure you're fully recovered, so you've got the max that you can give for the race. You don't want to be too recovered, and you don't want to have too much of an easy week that your legs aren't prepared for the race, but also you want to have plenty of time that you've got no fatigue left in those legs. Then we move on to the B races. So B races, again, they're still important races, and they make up the bulk of your racing in the year. You want to do well in these races. They'll be like your national series races, where, again, you'll still be wanting to do well in them. There'll still be an aim, but they won't be quite as important, and they won't be the pinnacle of your race season. These will have a smaller taper, so you'll probably have a rest day let's say the race is on the Sunday, you'd have a rest day on the Friday, an activation ride on the Saturday, and then you'd have your race on the Sunday. And you probably would keep any high intensity sessions to the start of that week. So you've still got a little bit of time to recover, but you're still managing to get a bit of training in that week. So you're not completely compromising your training for these races. Then we move on to the C races, and these are your little filler races. These aren't very important, but can be used for training. They're really good races for trying tactics, especially as a team, if you can get together and just try new things. These are really good for that. So if you've never attacked and tried to go solo, these are really good races to try that in. And it just gives you a bit more race experience, and it just gets you used to racing, ready for the big races that you want to do well in. You also need to sort of think about, if you're a rider at the races to fitness, these are the races you have quite frequently. If you prefer to train and then just pick up specific races, you'll probably have fewer of these. So these will be like your local races, regional races, and things that have less importance for you. Okay. So how to plan your season. So we start with the A races and then fill in the gaps between them, because that's the easiest thing to do. The A races are your most important races. So once you've pinpointed where they are, you'll be able to see more clearly where you want to be putting races. Again, as we said, focusing on races that are beneficial to these A races. So if you had the choice of a time trial or a hilly road race on the weekend, and your target was a hilly road race, you do the hilly road race, because you need to prepare yourself as best you can for those A races. So it'll help you choose what B races you enter and how many as well. Choosing those races, again, goes to terrain. So we've just spoken about that. If you're aiming for a hilly race, you choose a hilly race. If you're aiming for a flatter race, you'll choose a flatter race. But, for example, if you're a sprinter and you're aiming for national champs, and national champs is a sprinter's course, but it does have some hills in it, you also have to think about, what do you want to gain? So what you want to gain is something you also want to improve on, especially at the start of the season. To be a well-rounded cyclist, and especially with some of the junior races, they don't usually end in a breakaway. They usually end in a bunch sprint. So even if you're a good climber, you want to be able to do a bit of both. So you want practice of both sort of ends of racing. So if you're a really good climber but want to work on your sprinting, it might be worthwhile doing races that might help you work on that aspect. The same goes the other way around. If you're a sprinter that wants to ride well in a hilly race, has a sprinter's finish, then you might want to do some hilly races just to help you get prepared for that. And also think about your current fitness. If you've just come back from an injury or something like that, you might not want to enter a hard hilly race. You might want to start with something smaller, or you might want to start with something that's just less demanding. Also, if you've just come back from a training camp and you're absolutely flying, you might want to find a harder race because you know that you'll be at your peak and other people might not be. So it also depends on your current fitness levels. Racing frequency. This is a big one, and I know everybody wants to race all the time. I was guilty of it as a junior especially. It's something that we love doing, and you wait all winter to race, and everyone wants to get cracking right at the start of February. But you don't have to. I definitely not recommend racing every week because, as I said earlier, you'll just burn out. And it takes a lot of time to recover from something like that as well. If you allow your time to recover between things, you'll get better quicker and you'll have more time to train. And training is so important so that you can peak for those main events. As I said, it can also cause you to lose fitness because you just race that much and use that much energy that you're not recovering for the training sessions. So your quality of your training isn't actually as good as it could be. Even if you can still manage to do your training and race, it can still cause you to lose fitness. It's also really important to think about times of high stress. As juniors, you'll probably have exams during race season, and it might be good for you to avoid racing around these periods. I know it's hard because sometimes there are big races that fall in this period, but you just have to be very careful with how you plan it and think about how you deal with your stress as well. Some people can deal really well with it and can race during exams. Other people just can't. I personally could never race during my exams. When I did my A-levels, I remember I just took the whole month off and was like, I need to focus on this. And also education is really important. All of us want to be a professional bike rider, but you always want something to fall back on, especially at a junior level. So it's really important that we're balancing this. You don't want to end up missing your exams to go and do a race. Well, not missing your exams, but go and do a race during your exams when you could be just relaxing and training through it. And then sacrifice doing well in your exams and not even get a good race result. Next, when do you start the season? As I mentioned, everybody wants to start their race season in February, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do. So the first thing, do you need points? Some of you coming up from the youth category as a third cat or maybe even a fourth cat. If you want to race the national series, you need points to be able to race those races. So it is important to get racing early if you need points. You might start your season a bit earlier just so that you can get those points in and move up your categories quicker so you can get selected for the races you want to race. Also, do you race other disciplines? Some of you might race cyclocross, which might sway your start of the season in two ways. You might want a bit of a break because you've had a whole winter of racing. But you might also, if you're coming into really good form for the National Cyclocross Champs, you might want to try and carry that through. So then you might aim for something earlier in the season because you'll be fitter and more race ready than somebody who's been doing winter base miles all winter. So you need to think about things like that. How successful was your winter training? Again, if you've had a really good winter, you might be able to start your season a bit earlier. If you've had a bit of a hit and miss winter and you've not really started your training properly since, until January, you might want to wait a little bit to start your season just so you're going into it at the best fitness level possible. You also want to think about when your first event is. If your first event, for example, Cycle Classic is the first national series and that's at the end of March. So you want to start racing with enough time to get you race ready for that race. You don't want that to be your first race of the season. Equally, if you weren't racing that and you weren't racing until April, you don't want to be starting your race season in February if you don't have to. As I said earlier, with the race to fitness aspect, some riders love to race, and that's the only way they get that short-term speed and power development. So if you find that you race to fitness, I always used to when I raced, it is good to get your season started slightly earlier just so you can get a couple of races in before the big goal events begin to start. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when do you finish your season? Well, you need to look at the calendar for a start. Event availability it depends on what races there are available on the calendar. I know in previous years, everything's pretty much finished at the end of July. There's been one race in August and maybe one in September. So you'd finish your season earlier if that was the case, if there wasn't any races for you to race. Also dependent on your personal preferences. Again, previous years, they've been hilly races at the end of the year. So if you're a sprinter, you might decide to focus on the start of the year and then finish your season slightly earlier. But it's all, again, personal preference. Do you race other disciplines again? The same as we said earlier about cyclocross. You might want to finish your season earlier so that you can have enough time to prep for cyclocross. Additionally, if you've raced cyclocross the previous year and started your season a bit later, you might be able to extend it a bit longer than other riders. When is your last target event is really important, because obviously you've got to finish your season after that. But if your last target event's in September, you have to think about planning your race season so that you can finish at that event and you're not broken by the time you get there because you started in February. So that helps you choose when to finish your season, but it also has to be thought of when you're starting your season. How many breaks have you had in the season? So you might have had some time off to train. You might have had time off for exams. You might have had injuries. And there's all these different things that you might have had during the season that have caused you to have time off the bike or just time off racing. If you've had time off racing and you're actually quite fresh, you might be able to extend your season longer. If you've not had any breaks and you've crammed loads of racing, and you might have to finish early just so that you don't end up getting too fatigued and overtrained. So that's a really important thing to look at. Also, holidays. We all have holidays. We all want to go away, and we all want to go away in the nice weather when we're not at school. So holidays are also important. If you've got things booked, you might want to finish your season and then go on holiday. And then it's really nice as well because then you've got some time off the bike. So that's another thing to think about when you're finishing your season. Here we've got an example plan of a season. This is a very similar document to what I sent out to you guys. And this is just a couple of the races that the team are planning on doing this year. And it's kind of split into C races, which are these ones in white, B races, which are the ones in red, and then mainly the national series, and the A races are in yellow, so the national champs and Tour of Wales. So in this example, you start off at the start of the year, mainly smaller races, and as you progress, you get more bigger races, especially around your goal race, because you want to be racing at that higher level and have as much experience as possible by the time you get to your race of choice. For example, here you've got the Junior Tour of the Mendips as well. So that's a stage race, and that's perfect for prep for Junior Tour of Wales because they're similar sort of races. They're stage races, they're multiple events, and also they're both hilly. So all these things have been thought about based on what events the rider's targeting. We'll go through in a minute those ones that I sent out to you guys. If you've had a chance to write down your calendar, that's great. And you can think about prioritising. There's a column for priority of your race, so whether it's an A race, a B race, or a C race. And we can go through that in a second. So that's everything from me. I'll just stop sharing my screen so you can see me again. I've got to find you guys. So I hope that was good. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learned something. If you guys have got your sheets to hand, you can fill in that priority column now. Does anyone want to share a bit about their races and about how many races they had planned and whether that's changed based on what we've spoken about tonight? So you can either put your hand up and we can talk, or you can type your answer in the chat. It's up to you. Anyone want to share? Well, we've got that worksheet anyway. If you don't want to share, you can take that home with you and use the knowledge you've gained from tonight to fill those out. And obviously it will change based on person to person as well. So everyone's will be different, but you've got the opportunity then to use what you've learned tonight to plan stuff. So that's great from you guys. Any questions before we wrap up tonight? Anything you want help with choosing races, or any sort of questions you have about what I'd do in a certain situation that you're in if you're unsure of what races to enter? Good question, Vian. So is crit racing weekly a good idea? It's up to you. Again, as I said earlier about racing to fitness, it might be really good in the early season, especially if there's not much on otherwise for points chasing and things like that, so you can get your category. So then it might be really good. It depends what you're focusing on. Again, it's good to sharpen up. And if you find that you race to fitness, it's really good for that sort of stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily do it every week because, again, you'll burn out and you won't have time for quality training sessions. So it's a good mixture. You want to do a bit of both. If you want to include it, that's great because it does really help your top end. But I wouldn't do it every week. Hugh, you've got the same question. Again, you can do it. You can do a weekly crit if you want to, but you have to think about how you integrate that with your training and whether it's going to be beneficial to do it every single week. Another one from Ben. If one of my main races is at the start of the season and the only option for preparation races is the weekend before, will it fatigue me too much, or is it a good option for prep? Well, I think if it's the weekend before, as long as you have that taper week after, I think it's perfectly fine for you to race a race before if it is beneficial. The only thing I will say is you tend to find that the training comes into effect about 2 weeks after you've done it. So it'll be what you do 2 weeks before that event that you'll really see coming through performance-wise for that event. But I don't think fatigue-wise, I think if you have a proper taper into the event, I don't see an issue why you couldn't race the weekend before. Another question from Finn. I want to try and ride a proper road race. I have a history of hill climbing, crit racing, but haven't really done any real races. What races would you recommend? So I'd recommend starting with regional races just so that you can get a feel for road racing itself, because road racing itself is a completely different dynamic. Just because you're out on the bike for a longer period of time, and obviously with being out for a longer period of time, you don't go full gas the whole time. So start at like a regional level and have a look at where the course is. Like you'll know better than I will, especially local to where you are, where's hilly and where's not. If you want to do a hilly road race, research the area and choose a race that's in a hilly area and start at a regional level, and then you can kind of get a taster for hilly road racing, and then you can progress from there to a national level or national B level or national A level, depending on where you want to go and how you're finding the racing. And another one from Q. Would you say local time trials are good training? Not too often, obviously. Again, same as crits. I, as a youth and a junior, I raced a lot of time trialing, and I found it really helped, especially to build that power for road racing, because you're so used to sustaining a power for a long period of time. So yeah, I think it is a really good idea, but again, in moderation. So you don't want to be doing them necessarily every week. If you're a time trial specialist as well, you can still do time trials and road racing. But it's just good to combine them both and not do too much of one. Have we got any more questions at all? Perfect. Well, thanks for tonight, guys. That was really good. I'm just going to turn the recording off, and I'm just going to welcome some questions and just some feedback on tonight's session, and if anything that I've missed or anything that you'd want to hear from that you didn't already hear in this session. So I'm just going to stop the recording now.